Joinery systems, pocket screws, biscuits, dominoes, and dowels. I'm going to show you an easy way to quickly decide which system to use, and I'll give you some objective numbers to back it up so that you can rest easy knowing that your furniture projects will last. Let it be said right now that this video, like all my other videos, is targeted towards the beginner to intermediate home hobbyist woodworker who does not make nor sell a lot of furniture to customers. Because who wants to deal with customers? Not me. To me, there are joinery systems and there are traditional joints. A joinery system like the domino or dowels is a system that uses a jig or a specific tool that makes a sort of universal joint. Traditional joints like the mortise and tenon or the dovetail use universal tools or machines to create a joint for a specific scenario. Pocket screws are sometimes kiboshed by many woodworkers, but they're used in many professional applications and can definitely do the job if used appropriately. Are they as strong as some other systems or traditional joints? No, definitely not, but that shouldn't deter you from using them. Pocket screws are an easy way to get started joining wood if you're a beginner. It's one of the less expensive systems you can buy into, and it will work in many joinery situations. I've never been a fan of these smaller clamp-on jigs because they tend to wander around on you while you're drilling, but a larger stationary jig is only about $100 and it makes a world of a difference. And you can work faster too. Another benefit of pocket holes is that you don't need to wait for glue to dry to continue on working. I'm not saying you don't need glue, far from it, but the pocket screws will hold everything just fine until the glue dries. All the same, I would be a little selective about where and when you use these. You can't always conceal them, like in case joinery, they'll end up on the outside, but they do work for drawer boxes where the front will conceal them. They are going to do just fine in situations where there won't be much stress on them, like built-in plywood cabinetry, or when I needed to put a divider in the drawer cabinet in my workbench. But if you're using pocket screws to attach aprons to table legs, don't go coyote ugly on it. Let me take a moment to talk to you about a concept that I invented. I call it the cost, time, strength triangle. And no, you haven't seen anything like it before. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm gonna place pocket screws right here because although they're not necessarily stronger, they're inexpensive and they're very, very fast in any way you think about them. I'm making broad generalizations here to make things a little easier to see the big picture. But how do you know how fast they actually are? Well, I made 5 test joints using 2 3/4 inch poplar and timed how long it took me to drill the pocket holes and screw them together. I removed the highest and lowest values, averaged out the middle 3, and the result was 57 seconds per joint. Seems pretty fast to me, but we'll see how they compare with the other joinery systems soon. My final verdict with pocket screws is that they're good for getting started in woodworking and they're good in specific situations where the utmost strength is not required. But they can't be guaranteed to stand up to the test of time in many places in standalone furniture builds. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. I think biscuits are kinda whatever. There are a few inherent flaws, which I'll get to in a minute. The biscuit itself is inexpensive, but the joiner is going to run you at least a couple $100s. A biscuit is essentially a spline that goes into a slot that is cut by a small saw blade that you plunge into the joint. Biscuits are pretty darn wide, and even the smallest one cuts a slot that's 2 inches wide. And that size biscuit doesn't give you much holding power at all. The more common number 20 biscuit cuts a 3-inch wide slot. So as you can already tell, the biscuit joiner isn't going to work for everything. Another thing that bugs me about biscuits is the inconsistent fit that they have. The slots are all the same thickness, but the biscuit itself can vary and is usually pretty loose. One bit of conventional wisdom that gets tossed around a lot is that the biscuit is supposed to swell and create a tight fit, but that simply hasn't been my experience. More often than not, I'm frigging around with lining up the joint after gluing while trying to clamp it tight. This is especially frustrating when I've used biscuits specifically for aligning panel glue-ups. The biscuit joiner itself is pretty simple to operate. You just have the fence height setting and the plunge depth setting. You essentially just have to point and shoot, which makes it a pretty fast operation. How fast? 1 minute and 33 seconds on average, which is 36 seconds slower than pocket holes. And then you'll have to wait for the glue to dry. However, when I'm willing to wait the extra time, I'm usually after something that will give me stronger results. But how do you know how strong these joints are? I can tell you that I'm experienced enough to know by now, but that doesn't really help me convince you of anything. So I did some testing. Here is the setup. I have a test joint glued up with a biscuit clamped to my jig here. With this bottle jack, it's going to put pressure up on the joint, and this bathroom scale is going to measure the force it's going to take for the jack to break the joint. Now, it's all a little bit hand wavy and not super precise, but it'll give us a decent idea of how well each joint compares against each other. Enough talk, let's destroy things. I'm recording the reading of the scale with my phone so you can better see what I'm seeing. Biscuit number 1. Oh. Come on. Might have got 55 pounds out of that. Oh. Keeps going. Not really. Oh, yeah. Might have got 70 pounds out of that. Now, I did that 5 times total, removed the highest and lowest values, and got an average result of 68.7 pounds for the biscuited joint. What does that mean? Well, I did the same test for the pocket hole joint with glue, and that got an average of 86.3 pounds. That's 17.6 pounds stronger. That's right. Pocket hole screws are stronger than biscuits, and I'll be honest, I was a little surprised by that. Now granted, this is only one type of joint, since you can join 2 boards together in a number of different orientations. Furthermore, this radial or racking direction is only one way a joint can be stressed, but it is quite common, like for when you go all coyote ugly on that table of yours. So biscuit, I place thee right here in the cost times strength triangle. But honestly, I can't recommend the biscuit joiner over pocket screws for most applications. If you want fast but half decent alignment on panel glue ups, it'll do the job, but for everything else, I would favor most of the other options, as you'll see in a minute. Probably the number 1 question from people who have never used the next joinery system is do I need a Festool domino, and is it worth it? I really can't answer that question, so let's just skip the domino and move on. Only joking. I know you all either love these things or love to hate them. Although I must say these are far less controversial these days than they used to be here on the YouTubes. So why all the fuss? Well, the Festool domino has pretty much the same form factor and function as a biscuit joiner for about 5 times the price. Wait. Did you just say function? Yeah, no, that's a generalization that I can't make. The domino can join 2 pieces of wood just like a biscuit joiner, but that's where these similarities end. The domino joiner cuts a mortise up to 10 millimeters thick into 2 pieces of wood so you can glue them together with a domino, otherwise known as a slip tenon, loose tenon, or floating tenon, which is by and large a mortise and tenon, the bread and butter of all woodworking joinery for probably thousands of years. But wait, I can make a mortise and tenon with my router and table saw or my hand tool, so why do I need a domino? Well, obviously you don't, but man, it makes things a lot faster. Plus, you can use a domino to join wood together in any orientation, whether it be frames, boxes, cases, miters, angled joinery, it all works. And since the domino plunges a much narrower and thicker mortise than a biscuit joiner makes a slot, it's more flexible and stronger. Stronger? Prove it. All right. I did the same strength test with the same size joint using 2 6mm dominoes, and I got an average of 147.7 pounds. I use 6mm because it's approximately 1/3 the thickness of the material, which is the prevailing popular opinion on how thick a tenon should be. And I used 2 dominoes where I could only use 1 biscuit because that's what I would do if this were a real life joint. If I compared 1 domino to 1 biscuit to 1 pocket screw to 1 dowel, I would definitely get different numbers, but they would be meaningless in a real world scenario. So because of this, the domino was slightly slower than the biscuit joiner at an average of 1 minute and 55 seconds, even though they had the same form factor. But yeah, you pay a price for it. The tool itself is about 5 times the price of your average biscuit joiner, and the dominoes themselves are about 2 to 5 times more expensive than biscuits. But if the price doesn't faze you, then here's another consideration before you buy. If you are a results-driven woodworker, then get the domino and that will get you to the finish line faster. If you are more of a fan of the process than the final result, the domino might not interest you, and that's okay. So yeah, it's expensive, but it's also strong and fast, which is why you see so many people using them, because to many, it's worth the expense, particularly in a professional environment. All the same, the Festool domino goes right about here on my super unique cost, time, strength triangle. Dowels are super common in crappy IKEA furniture, which is why I think they get a bad rap from woodworkers. Factory flat pack furniture is usually made from particle board or at best a very soft wood, and you're not instructed to glue the dowels in when assembling, so of course it falls apart and people hate dowels. Furthermore, there are a lot of bad dowel jigs out there. Really bad. I've used a couple of them and they are worse than miserable to use. They cause misalignments and the dowels end up very loose fitting. This is all not a strong start for dowels. However, if you invest in a high quality dowel jig, it can quickly become a favorite tool to use and is truly a thing of beauty. The one that I have experience with, and you've seen me use it before on the channel, is the DOWELMAX. I know it's expensive for a dowel jig, but trust me when I say that those cheap ones that are like $100 or less are worse than bad. I would rather use pocket screws than one of those. A good jig like this one is still a fraction of the price of a domino and can pretty much work in any scenario that a domino can, and that's a lot of scenarios. I'll leave an affiliate link to the DOWELMAX in the description. You see me do most of the joinery in my workbench with dowels using some massive 1/2 inch by 4 inch ones. And this thing is a tank. It hasn't budged or made a peep since finishing it. I've also used dowels in case joinery like my drill charging station. I've doweled many drawer boxes and they've all lasted for years. And you can also do exposed dowels, something that I don't recommend doing with dominoes because that would look If you compare one domino to one dowel, I'd hedge a bet that the domino is stronger. But you can fit many more dowels in the same size joint than you would if you were using dominoes. For my test, I was able to put 4 3/8 inch dowels in the same size joint as I was able to fit 2 6mm dominoes, or just the one biscuit. But more doesn't always equal better, does it? Well, remember that the domino averaged 147.7 pounds, well, the dowel averaged 171.7 pounds. Wait. Dowels are stronger than dominoes? Yeah, they are, but it shouldn't actually be too surprising as there's more surface area in these 4 dowels than there is in these 2 dominoes. But what about speed? Yeah, the whole jig with a drill does seem to be a little bit slower, and not surprisingly, it is. I averaged 2 minutes and 25 seconds per joint, which is 1/2 minute slower than the domino. And these dowel jigs can be adjusted such that it can work in a variety of ways, which causes the setup time to be longer for this than simply adjusting the fence and depth on the domino. Even still, I truly believe that the dowel jig is reasonable for the average home hobbyist woodworker. Where does the dowel jig lie on my super exclusive cost time strength triangle? Right about here. Now, I know I'm throwing a bunch of numbers out about how strong these joints are, but does that really matter at the end of the day? I don't like to think in terms of how strong is this joint, because inevitably that will lead me down the road of trying to put a number to a joint and grade them from worst to best and simply choosing the strongest joint every single time. Instead, I ask myself, how long do I want this to last? If your answer to that question is, I want this to be an heirloom piece of furniture that I can pass down to my kids and grandkids, then I ask you to be honest with yourself. Did you ever want any of your grandparents' furniture? No! No one's going to want your mid-century modern lounge chair in 30 years. That's what the 90s taught us. All that is to say, don't feel like you have to go down the road of traditional mortise and tenons and dovetails just because some magazine told you that it's unacceptable if your furniture lasts anything less than 100 years. However, if that's how you get your groove on in the shop, then have at her. So what does all this mean? Well, looking at my super innovative triangle a little closer gives us a good idea of what the best all-around system is. Dowels. This is because it strikes the best balance between cost, time, and strength. The domino is strong too, strong enough for most things, but it's expensive. Pocket screws are inexpensive and fast, but it might not be great for every single situation. And biscuits, well, I've come to the realization that I don't think I have room in my shop anymore for the biscuit joiner. I learned that if I want fast joinery, pocket screws are faster and a little bit stronger to boot. If I want alignment, Well, I could use my dowel jig for that, or I suppose I have the domino now too. And to any new woodworkers out there, the pocket screw does make sense for an easy start, and investing in a high quality dowel jig later on will serve you and your furniture for years. If you want to learn about more conventional and traditional joints, then click right here to watch my next video, but if I haven't made that video yet, then you'll just have to subscribe so you'll know when I release it. Bye!